The scripture reading this morning is Psalm 119, 27 to 41. Make me understand the way of your precepts, and I will meditate on your wondrous works. My soul melts away for sorrow. Strengthen me according to your word. Put false ways far from me, and graciously teach me your law. I have chose the way of faithfulness. I set your ordinances before me. I cling to your decrees. O Lord, let me not be put to shame. I run the way of your commandments, for you enlarge my understanding. Teach me, O Lord, the way of your statutes, and I will observe it to the end. Give me understanding, that I may keep your law and observe it, and my whole heart. Lead me in the path of your commandments, for I delight in it. Turn my heart to your decrees and not to selfish gain. Turn my eyes from looking at vanities. Give me life in your ways. Confirm to your servant your promise, which is for those who fear you. Turn away the disgrace that I dread, for your ordinances are good. See, I have longed for your precepts, and the righteousness give me life. Let your steadfast love come to me, O Lord, your salvation according to your promise.
Thank you, Betsy. And thank you, Mackenzie, for that offertory. I do love those improvisations. All right, here we go. For those of you who have not been here for one of these, for the next 20 minutes or so, I am going to attempt to address as many questions as possible. Again, attempt being the key word. We have some that have been sent in ahead of time, and then I hope that you have some. And the procedure is we alternate. I will start with one sent in to sort of prime the pump, and then we will take it from there. So here we go. Why hurricanes? Oh, sorry. No, that's not the question. We spent a long time on that last week. If Adam and Eve were the first and presumably only people, how do those who read the Bible literally explain their son Cain's marriage in Nod and his considerable descendants? Okay. Well, I'm sure it won't surprise you to know that there's never been a definitive explanation for that. You know the story, Cain and Abel. Cain kills his brother Abel, and then he's basically made an exile by God as punishment. But then we're told that he gets married. He goes off, he gets married, and he has a bunch of kids. There's two parts to that story. There's that part, and then there is the reason. There's also the part where when Cain learns about his banishment from God, he asks God for mercy, and he claims he wants that because he is concerned that someone out there will harm him. So it's essentially the same question. Who's out there if they are presumably the first people? Okay, well, there's been a number of explanations. I mean, the most common in terms of those who see the story literally is to say that, well, yes, Cain and Abel were Adam and Eve's first children, but they had others. And so Cain was expressing concern that perhaps one of those other siblings was going to seek vengeance for their brother Abel's death. Okay, that's another one of them. Another one of the explanations is that the story does not tell us that God has not made other people somewhere else. So one of the other ideas is that, that's who Cain is referring to, that he takes a wife from those other people and has descendants with that person, and those are the people that he's concerned about being harmed by. Again, all well and good, but as we've talked about before in classes and Bible study here on Sundays, my orientation towards those stories, particularly those first 8 chapters in the book of Genesis, is that they are what scholars call the prehistory, that they are basically fables. They are stories, and or myth is actually the term that scholars use. But when biblical scholars use the term myth, they don't mean like we tend to mean in our time and culture when we say myth, as in false. Myth, from an academic standpoint, essentially means a story that may not be historically factual, but is intended to immerse us in a larger question or a larger issue. Well, I come from an orientation where those first 8 chapters of the Bible, the creation stories, Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel, Noah, the flood, all of that, those are meant to immerse us in the big questions. Why are we here? How did we get here? How does God call us to live? Why is there evil in the world? Okay, the Cain and Abel story is meant to represent the emergence of evil in the world. Okay? An evil that then continues on, as we know, and what happens is the Noah story is essentially a continuation of the Cain story, in that Cain kills Abel, evil emerges in the world, Cain goes off and he marries and has all these other descendants, and humanity grows. And it is that humanity that apparently becomes so wicked that by the time we get to Noah, God decides to wipe everyone out, and start over. All right, your turn. No one? Yes.
Is there anything in the Bible that would be representative of what's happening now in Israel?
I'm not quite sure. Can you be a little more specific?
Just all the death and destruction that's happening. I know there's times in the Bible when that part of the world was in great distress.
Yeah, like always. Yeah. It's just, so I would answer it this way. I am not one who looks at the Bible, again, as a history book, a textbook, or somehow a prophetic book about specific things that will happen historically or in our time. What I do see in the Bible is an ancient, age-old story about the human condition. Okay? If you look at the Bible, people who look at the Bible as just some ancient, irrelevant text, I think miss the point of it. Because if you really look at it, in there you will find everything and anything that happens to all of us in this time. Not necessarily the actual specifics, but the human condition in general. The struggles with violence and poverty and injustice and war and greed and sibling rivalry. It's all there. It is the story of humanity. So yeah, in the Bible, I see a legacy of the human condition and the turmoil that humanity faces, not just in that part of the world, but in every part of the world, because it can't get its act together. It won't live the way that God calls us to. All right, let's see what we got here. All right, speaking of Noah, I heard that at Bat Yam's Simchat Torah service on Friday night, you were critical of Noah. What did you say and why? Guilty as charged. Okay. All right, so first of all, Simchat Torah is an occasion during the Jewish calendar, which is essentially, it's almost the start of the Torah teaching year. The Torah is taken out of, out of the cabinet, and and essentially it's rolled out gradually, and the rabbi stops at points along the way and does some teachings. Okay, it's sort of the official start of the teaching of the Torah year. Well, the last couple of years, other clergy have been invited by Rabbi Schnitzer to participate, myself included, and we get to choose if we would like something that we want to comment on in the Torah, those first 5 books of the Bible, okay? Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Deuteronomy, Numbers. So I chose the Noah story, because I've had a little bit of a beef with Noah for a while now. Okay? The text tells us that God found favor with Noah. First of all, God tells us that, again, continuation of the Cain and Abel story, that humanity had become so wicked that God decides to wipe it out. Okay? But Noah found favor with God. Doesn't say why right away, but a little while later, it describes Noah as being righteous among his generation. Okay? Righteous meaning, living according to God's ways. Kindness, goodness, justice, charity, all of those things. Okay? Now again, note that it says righteous among his generation, which many of the rabbis and other biblical scholars take to mean it doesn't necessarily mean he was righteous. He was just more righteous than the rest of them. And considering that they're described as being totally wicked, I use the analogy, since it's World Series time, of baseball. It's like describing somebody who hits 150 on a team full of hitters who only hit 100 as being a really good player. They're not. They're still awful. Okay? But that's the reason given. So I kind of called BS on all of that, on this idea that Noah was righteous. And why? Well, because when Noah learns what God is up to, and that God is only going to save Noah and his family, what does Noah do? Not a thing. Not a thing. He doesn't say anything. He doesn't warn any of the other humans on the planet that this is coming. He doesn't invite anybody into the boat. He just sort of takes it as it is. Okay? And again, as I said that on Friday, it's hard for me to believe nobody noticed. That the neighbors didn't wander by and go, "Hey, Noah, what's with the boat in the driveway?" Okay? But he doesn't do anything. And I contrasted Noah to Abraham. Said Noah maybe should have been a little bit more like Abraham, because Abraham is faced with a similar situation. God tells Abraham that God's going to wipe out all the people in Sodom and Gomorrah. And then in the famous story, Abraham's response is to say to God, well, what if you find 50 righteous people in the entire city? You still going to destroy it? And God thinks, says, okay, I won't. And Abraham keeps going. Well, what if you find 40? God says, okay, if I find 40, I won't destroy it. What if you find 30? What if you find 20? Abraham finally gets God down to 10. God pledges not to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah if 10 righteous people can be found. Apparently that didn't happen, because Sodom and Gomorrah do end up getting destroyed. But Abraham at least tried to intervene on behalf of people. It didn't matter to Abraham whether they were wicked or not. That wasn't his to judge. He just saw that these people were going to die. And he at least tried to do something about it, which to me makes Abraham a lot more righteous than Noah. So that's what that was all about. So I did, I was a little bit critical of Noah, but it wasn't anything that that Jewish congregation was not aware of. That has been an ongoing debate within Judaism for centuries. Okay? All right, your turn. Yes, Scott?
So, if the Bible urges us to be fruitful and multiply, how do we square that with the carrying capacity of the planet?
Okay, great. So I will go right back and ground my answer into what I said a little while ago about how I understand the Bible. Okay, that it is not meant as a textbook or a history book. It is, I call it religious literature. It is a collection of texts of all different genres written by our spiritual ancestors in an attempt to understand who and what God is and how God calls us to live. That's why we have so many different types of literature in the Bible, and why there are so many different and varying and at times contradictory ideas presented. Okay? So if the intent of those first 8 chapters, the prehistory, is meant to sort of engage us in major questions, but also be representative of the people who wrote it, the understanding is that that part of the Bible was probably written during the time of Babylonian exile. Okay? And those stories were a way for the Jewish people who were in captivity and did not know if they would survive, and more importantly, did not know if their spiritual tradition would survive, to have something to be able to pass that on in the event that it did. So, to your question about the edict to be fruitful and multiply, if you are a people in bondage and you are concerned about whether your people will survive, okay, you advocate being fruitful and multiplying. You are looking to keep your community alive. Okay, it's a lot of the same idea comes in Exodus too, about this idea of keeping the community alive as they come out of their time of exile in Egypt. So that's how I look at that. So it's not contradictory at all, because I talk a lot about themes in the Bible. What are the patterns? Because you can find, I guarantee you can find at least one thing in the Bible to support any position on anything that you would like. So I think the more important question is always, what are the patterns? And clearly one of the patterns in the biblical literature is the respect and care for creation. So they're not contradictory. Okay. All right, let's see. Who besides Jesus is your favorite biblical character? All right, well, who said Jesus was my favorite biblical character? No, just kidding. Again, as I addressed somebody else's question recently, it depends upon the day and the time and what's going on in my life, who comes to mind first. I would say probably the two people that come, I'm going to answer it with two. The two folks that just immediately pop into my head this morning are Peter. And Peter is a pretty consistent answer for me. Peter for me for a couple of reasons. He is, of all the people in the Christian scriptures, in the New Testament, in the Gospels, he's the most completely fleshed out. He's the most real to me. Because just like me, he has his moments where he gets it, and he has a lot of moments where he doesn't. He says the wrong thing at the wrong time, just like I do. He does the wrong thing at the wrong time, just like I do. So I see in Peter, I see myself in Peter frequently. And we tend to relate to characters in the Bible that we see ourselves in. So so Peter always is one that comes to mind. The other one, for whatever reason this morning, that popped into my head was Esther. Esther from the Hebrew scriptures. Okay, Queen Esther, who is who becomes queen when the Jewish people are second-class citizens. And she's Jewish and hides that identity, becomes queen. But then a member of the king's royal court who has a thing against the Jewish people plots to have them killed. And so Esther is faced with this dilemma. She either, keeps quiet and remains queen, or she has to reveal who she really is and petition the king on behalf of her people. At first, she's not going to do it. But then her uncle, kind of her adopted second father, a guy named Mordecai, comes to her, and convinces her that that is the thing to do. It's the story where we get that famous phrase, for such a time as this. That Esther is where she is for such a time as this. And Esther eventually has the courage to admit to the king that she is Jewish, and eventually, saves the Jewish people through that revealing. So I relate to her just because of her courage. Her courage, because there are many times that I wish I had more of that moral courage. Barbara?
These days you hear a lot about the words equity and equality. What kind of wisdom does the Bible have on the defining and separation of those two?
No, I'm just, I have to think a second. The Bible doesn't use the word equity per se. It uses the word equality not a ton, but it seems to me that the principles run through that. Okay, equality in the sense that it's very clear that we are considered to all be equal in the eyes of God, created equally in the eyes of God. Doesn't mean we're the same. Okay, it means, we all have our different gifts and talents and all of those things. We are created differently, but equally in the eyes of God. And as we know, we are not all born into the same, social or economic or, ethnic standings. Okay, so that's where the other idea comes in, the other idea of equity. And equity, again, per se, is not explicitly mentioned in the Bible, but the idea of sharing resources, and the idea of to whom much is given, much is expected. That kind of thing. That certainly runs deeply through the Bible. The idea that we are to take care of each other, and that we are certainly to provide opportunities for others to become, all that God created them to be. So the two terms are related, although neither one of them is really used to any specific extent in the Bible, but certainly thematically, it seems to me at least, that they run through pretty consistently. It's not that we're, the great basketball coach John Wooden used to say that the easiest way to not treat people equally is to treat them all the same. So we are all equal in the eyes of God, but we don't all have the same things, the same standings. So again, it's a matter of making sure that others' needs are met. Okay. Oh boy. There are many verses in the Gospels regarding how to be saved. There's believing in Jesus, there's being baptized, there's being born again. How do we understand what is needed for salvation? Next question. Oh boy. All right. So, again, as I repeat ad nauseum to you, I'm sure, there's no single definition of salvation in the Bible. There's no single understanding of salvation among Christian theologians. Never has been, doubt there ever will be. Okay, those are some of the ones that are mentioned. Those tend to come from believing in Jesus, being born again. Those sort of definitive definitions of salvation tend to come a little bit more from our evangelical sisters and brothers. In our corner of Christianity, it's a little murkier. Again, because the Bible doesn't give us any single definition of what that is, and that's a reflection of different texts written at different times by different communities within Judaism and Christianity to address their needs in a particular time. Okay? So, and my problem with some of those sort of pat answers as to what salvation is that it can so easily lead to this idea, well, I'm saved, I'm good. Sort of that's it, don't need to do any more. I'm right with Jesus, right with God, I'm all set. That makes me a little nervous. Okay? So instead, if I were to offer my own sort of understanding in the moment, today, for what salvation is, my understanding from the biblical literature and from theologians is that salvation is coming into union with God and God's ways. Okay? Bringing our lives into union with God and God's ways. Okay? But the caveat there is that the biblical literature never suggests that is just an individual thing, that salvation is just an individual thing. Salvation is always understood in the biblical literature as a both and. It's both individual and it is community. We are not just saved individually. We are saved together. Okay, so salvation then becomes not just myself or yourself coming into union with God and God's ways, but we, humanity, creation, coming into union with God and God's ways. So to me, I guess in the end, the most important thing is to use Jesus' words, follow me. If we want salvation individually and together, follow me. We don't need to spend a lot of time trying to theorize about what all that is. Let's just be good disciples. Let's just follow Jesus and maybe we'll find our way there someday. Your turn. Yes, sir. I don't know if I want to answer that because I think that's an upcoming message. Question. Oh, what did the story of Jesus cursing the fig tree mean to me? Jesus is walking along with the disciples and he's hungry and he comes to a fig tree and there's nothing on it. No figs. So he curses it. Says, you're never going to bear fruit again. Okay. So that's sort of one of the more enigmatic stories in the Bible, one of those stories that is characteristic of the person I call not so nice Jesus. Because there's times in the Bible when Jesus is not so nice, and we tend to sort of avoid those stories. I don't know. Again, I literally am considering that as a future message. But again, in this moment, I look at it more symbolically. Again, this idea of something that should be producing fruit, not producing that fruit. And therefore, it is cursed in the sense that it will not become what it was created to be. So if we look at it, symbolically from a spiritual sense, It could very well be and again, the stories always have more than one meaning, or they can be understood in more than one way. But this particular way, the story represents us. We are the fig tree, and the question is, are we bearing the fruit that we are supposed to? Goodness and kindness and justice and mercy and forgiveness and love and compassion and all those things that we just talked about in terms of salvation. Are we producing that fruit? And then if we are not when we are supposed to be, we are cursed in that way. I don't look at it so much as Jesus cursing us as, we're cursed in that way. It's sort of the natural consequences of our unwillingness or our failure to live as God calls us to do. Our spirits will wither and die. That's just reality. What we don't put time into, what we don't put effort into, doesn't grow. In fact, most of the time it atrophies. But I'll probably have another answer on that question in a few weeks when I decide to tackle that passage. What we got? A couple more. Let's see. Oh, maybe we should just stop right here. You haven't spoken or written about the election, as far as I recall. Why or why not? All right, well, if we're talking about speaking explicitly about it, no, I have not. Nor will I, if we're talking about, my speaking about particular candidates or, who to vote for or anything like that. And there's a really good reason for that. It's called the Johnson Amendment. Okay, the Johnson Amendment was an act of Congress by then Senator Lyndon Johnson, which allowed for the tax-exempt status for nonprofit organizations, such as churches, such as this church. But part of the Johnson Amendment is that meant that those nonprofit organizations were prohibited from directly advocating for any political candidates. Okay? So that's the legal answer. Okay? The rest of the answer is, as you are aware, it's not like I don't talk about issues, present-day issues. Okay? But I feel my responsibility is to talk to you about them from a biblical, theological, and spiritual perspective, and then respect you enough to determine your own positions, your own understandings of these things. That is a foundational part of our denomination, our corner of Christianity, this idea of freedom of conscience. Okay, that my job is not to tell you what to believe or what to think or who to vote for. It is to do the best job that I can of discussing things from a biblical, theological, and spiritual perspective, and then allowing your freedom of conscience the same way that you allow mine. And the other reason that I don't, again, even if it was legal, I'm not sure that I would, is because I don't see Jesus as a political figure. And let me clarify that. Okay. Does Jesus talk about what we would consider in our time political issues? Certainly. War, poverty, injustice, all of those things. Okay. But despite what some would like to claim in this time, okay, Jesus was neither a Democrat or a Republican, in my mind. Okay? Does not belong to a political party. One cannot be God's representative in humanity and belong to one political party. Okay? If anything, Jesus is apolitical, went out of his way to embrace even the people he disagreed with the most. Okay? So what his orientation to me seemed to be, again, was always what we call the kingdom of God or the kingdom of heaven. That time when humanity and creation come into union with God and God's ways. That was it. He was a person of his time as well. So that's that. Time for one last one, if there's one out here. Preferably one a lot easier than the last. Yeah, Judy?
I hope I'm not out of line in asking, what is the status of the Christmas Eve beach service this year?
We do not know yet. The status of the Christmas Eve beach service. We do not know yet. Okay. More on that when we know. Do we have another one? Yes, Joanne.
Specific place you go to reinforce your belief?
When I feel weakened, is there a specific place I go to reinforce, to re-energize? Yeah, great question. Well, I start with the woman in the back. Hey, that's always worked out pretty well. I go to the biblical literature. I have, a couple of people that whose writings I'm really attracted to. There's a woman named Mary Ludy, who is one of the regular writers for our denomination's daily devotional. She's a longtime seminary professor, theologian, pastor. I find her writings to be consistently accessible and profound at the same time. I get sort of revitalized through exercise. I bike riding. I'm out. I'm out in nature. Those kinds of things. It gives me an opportunity for my mind to stop spinning as it tends to do, and then maybe as much, if not more than any other, it's you. It's being with you on Sunday, or being with our smaller groups on Tuesday night or on Thursday. Okay, those things, I always tell the participants, and I think I always get more out of them than they do, because I get out of those sessions. I get out of Sunday morning, and I am reinvigorated, no matter what's gone on during the week. Things like this, being able to just sort of talk about what's on your mind. Okay? Bruce?
I keep looking at that large boat, and I think that Sanibel has some water problems, perhaps. And I'm wondering, we have a wonderful parking lot. Are we missing a Noah opportunity in the 21st century? Maybe not for the animals, but maybe we divide the boat in half. As you pointed out, there were other biblical things where he tried to save.
I'm not sure I know what you mean.
Do you think we should build Noah boat and let you have a modern day Noah experience?
Oh, should we build an ark in the parking lot and let me have a modern day Noah experience? No, thank you. No, thank you. Not now, not ever. But. All right, thank you so much. Just again, as always, great questions, and I probably got more out of it than you did, but I hope you at least got a little something out of it. So, I invite